All right, the recording's going. Letting a few more folks in. Well, greetings. Happy Thursday, guys. We'll get going here. Everybody's rolling in. I'll watch the waiting room. But seats, usage, or I underlined or outcomes because it doesn't mean it's usage and outcomes or seats and outcomes. A lot of different pricing models emerging today. So let me look at the waiting room here. I'm going to get some more folks in here. So reviewed 107 pricing pages across 30 verticals. So we're going to see, so this is data-based, not what social media is saying. So we've got some hard data just to see where pricing is trending with AI in 2026. So with that, would like to just have a quick shout out to Maxio for sponsoring my AI educational webinar series. So I appreciate it. A lot of time was spent in putting this together, and I've got a link in the chat. So check them out because this is kind of a perfect pairing, with pricing, billing, usage, and then actually, getting that invoice out the door. So many thanks to Maxio for sponsoring this. So billing and monetization for B2B SaaS finance teams. So they've been a good partner so far with my AI educational series. So that link's in the chat. Check them out if you're looking for a billing solution. So with that, let's get rolling. And also, before we get going, I noticed there were a lot of CFOs signing up for this webinar, and I've got a private community going. We've got about 600 plus members. There's a QR code on the screen. You can scan that with your phone and apply to the community, or there is a link that you can see bit.ly/tech CFO community. I'll show this slide again at the end, but I just noticed there were tons of CFOs signing up for this webinar today. So if you're head of finance at a tech community or SaaS CFO, tech CFO, please join us in the 600 members. So again, I'll show this slide at the end in case you missed it. Let me admit some more folks here. So today, what we'll cover, always a lot to cover here. Uh, so first, how is software pricing changing? The arc from perpetual licenses to seats to outcomes and why AI may break the seat model. We hear that in social media. How AI is really being priced today. So again, this is data-based across the 107 pricing pages and 30 plus software verticals. And the outcome pricing reality check. What does good look like? And it takes a lot of work to put a good outcome pricing plan together. And then four, 5 questions before you sign. If you are being offered an outcome-based pricing plan, what are those key considerations? And then finally, where is the market heading? So part one, how is software pricing changing today? So I don't know if anyone in the audience, if you were working back in software in the 90s, not to date you, but just to show your experience here. I got started in software in, I think about 2004, definitely back, of course, there's still those perpetual days in the 2000s and then transitioned. I remember my first assignment, to change it from perpetual to ASP back in the day. But we went from perpetual to per seat, then to usage and consumption, so pay for what you run. And then the AI era over the last couple of years, outcomes and hybrid. So pay for your results or maybe a blend. We'll see which pricing model is leading the pack right now. So why does per seat logic break in the AI era? And we've seen all these posts and news posts about legacy SaaS is dead. If you're offering per seat pricing that's dead. And we'll see where that's shaping up. But, there are different, and I'll go back to this one slide here. Let's just, let me admit some more folks here. But, each era we had a different value prop, right? In the 90s, it was about owning it, owning the software. We get some value out of that. In, say the 2000s, I think Salesforce, what was, started in 1999, then it went to per seat. So someone said a computer, that per seat license, that created value based on the person using it. Then it was more rate times volume. Okay, it did something, I consumed something, and supposedly value is being created from that. And then finally, of course, the AI era today. So back in the day, a seat priced human effort. Software is sold by the login because that kind of mapped to a person doing work. So person equals value. And we know that's breaking today if agentic AI is doing the work. And then AI does the work, yeah, not the user. And then fewer seats can mean more value. So now if an agent can do the work of 10 people, right, is that breaking that seat model? So that's that argument, for seat pricing logic. breaking, but we'll see how that's playing out in the 107 pricing pages. So the market is mid-experiment, I'd say. This is changing fast. We saw when Agentforce came out and said, "Hey, this is, outcome-based." I don't think it was truly outcome-based, but then I analyzed over 100 SEC filings, 10Q filings, press release filings to see, are people really doing outcome-based pricing? And I could only find about one out of, say, 100 public SaaS companies that actually offered outcome. But now we see it in the news with GitHub, Anthropic, others, that the pricing is changing fast. And Iconic puts out some great reports, that 37% of AI companies plan to change their pricing model within the next 12 months. And we know pricing always iterates. It's a never-ending process. And then 2 to 18% outcome-based pricing share of deals in a single year. So we're seeing some movement, but we're still in definitely the shakeout era of AI pricing. And what my research found is right now, only 1 in 8 are offering true outcome-based pricing. And we'll see what those other models are. If they're not offering outcome-based pricing, what exactly are they offering? So outcome pricing moving fast, it's gone from a rounding error to, a minority, but not the default. Definitely not the default, despite what you read out there. So how is AI actually being priced? And let me check the chat here. Yeah, yeah. So I'd love, post any comments, questions in the chat, or interact, with other participants here. Let me let some more folks in here. But the data set. So 170 pricing pages, and definitely burned a lot of tokens with this. 30 plus verticals. It'll really be interesting to see which verticals actually offer outcome pricing more than other software verticals. And there are kind of 6 mechanics that fell out, after analyzing all these pricing pages, these 6 attributes that should be considered with pricing. And all these were 100% sourced to the public page or someone who actually did the analysis on this. So let's dive into this. So and again, at the end of this, I'll have a way, I'll tell you how you can get these slides, plus a lot of cheat sheets in my research report. But this is how things are shaking out right now after reviewing those 107 pricing pages. Let me do this quick. So one, of course, pure outcome. That's where we're talking about. 2, a hybrid, which is interesting. And I had a lot of conversations even before AI with SaaS founders who are offering usage-based pricing, and where it was kind of losing that appeal, because we learned in the pandemic, if you're offering pure usage with no floor, that can go to zero pretty fast, depending on the product that you're offering. Third, usage meter, or usage basically per raw unit, right? That rate times volume, whether it's minutes, tokens, or sessions. And then credit and consumption. Buy a pool of credits, burn down that credit pool. Then per unit of work, per task completed, per invoice, per case, per interview. And it's really interesting on a Salesforce earnings call where they define like that agentic work unit. And that's going to be different from every single company, but that per unit of work. And that's again going to vary based on the work that you're doing for your customers. And then, of course, the old good per seat pricing that we still see today. And I interview a lot of SaaS and AI founders for my podcast and I always talk about pricing. And for those AI native founders, a lot of them just say subscription. They're just starting out simple. They're like, I want to make a pricing plan that's easy for my customer to understand. So definitely you still see per seat subscription pricing for, AI native products. And Paul asks, is that per unit work on Salesforce or pre-built agent? And that, really depends. They said, hey, you got to define your agentic work unit. That doesn't mean one token. That could mean a million tokens doing some measurement of work. So 6 ways through these 170 pricing pages that we're seeing AI price today. So now this is interesting. So again, we saw 1 in 8 are pure outcome, but no category tops 28%. So that's why I said we're kind of mid-experiment here. But what's leading the pack? Hybrid. Kind of no surprise after you've seen all those pricing announcements, pricing changes from GitHub, from Anthropic, that were offering subscription AI and maybe losing a lot of margin on those, that they shifted more to a platform or a floor plus usage. Then we've got pure usage, rate times volume. We've got credit and consumption, pure outcome per seat, and then per unit of work. So this is the breakdown of those pages. And again, I don't know if there are any surprises here, but really we've seen a lot of these companies that came out AI native that were offering subscription-based plans, but it was a token-based product and probably realized, looking at their SaaS P&L margins by revenue stream, but boy, we're not making a lot of margin on these, or maybe we're actually losing margin on our heavy users. So a lot of that hybrid shift. But 1 in 8 in outcome. But again, I think the big fact here, no category tops 28%. So a lot of different ways to price your product right now. And Valerie, yep, I'll show you at the end. Uh, yeah, how we can, these slides plus a couple cheat sheets plus a 15-page research report on the 107 pricing pages. So who actually bears the risk here? That's really interesting with outcome-based pricing. Uh, you know, if the company says that the outcome was achieved, well, what happens in the case of failure? Or what about a dispute? So in this case, in reviewing these pricing pages, again, this is where if you go to outcome-based pricing pages, they may have the one page, but there could be a whole nother terms and conditions on that you've got to read, or maybe you have AI read to really see how they're going to charge you for that outcome. So out of these pricing pages, 45%, the buyer pays regardless of the results. And again, this is across that spectrum, you know, where it could be outcome based or not, but still almost half is just, yeah, you're going to pay, doesn't matter. And then 34% shared, and buyer and vendor split the risk. And what I mean by this is that this is more of that rate volume that they're going to charge you because the software did something, it created a report, it I don't know, you know, completed some sort of work unit, and you're going to get charged whether, you think it happened or not. And then 12%, the vendor absorbs it. We'll talk about the good pricing mechanics for outcome-based pricing, but 12% where, yeah, if that outcome didn't happen or it's disputed, we're not going to charge for it. And then hedged, right, where we've got a platform floor plus variable upside. So really, just like outcome-based pricing, still emerging, but still, only 12% of those pricing pages are going to let, the company's going to absorb the risk, rather than you. So seats did not die, they became the floor. And this is really interesting. AI products still build purely seat-based, including tools, sodas, autonomous agents. So you're seeing a lot of these Harvey, Gong, Fathom, other marketed as AI agents, but still have some per user per month floor and maybe some outcome and usage on top of that. So that's why we're seeing that hybrid model emerge, whether it's just a platform fee or you have to at least spend 5 seats, right? You see that in some of the Anthropic stuff in Claude, with those team and enterprise plans that include so many seats, plus if you go over. And I think this is really interesting. 39% of vendors I may have mentioned this, keep a fixed platform or seat fee. So that has not gone away. And I've had a lot of conversations with SaaS founders in the past, even before AI, where they're just tired of that pure usage model because it just fluctuates so much. So it was always nice. I thought as a CFO, I always recommended saying we need some floor, right? We need some subscription in there. And then, that can absorb some of the shock of usage going up and down. But 39% of vendors keeping the platform or seat fee, again, minimum 5 seats plus usage, not going with just pure usage. So this may be different from that pure seat model of, hey, I buy 1 seat, I buy 2 seats. Now we're kind of seeing those packs, which become a platform floor and then usage on top. Now this is a bit of an eye chart, but this is by vertical. And the one thing that does stand out here is that customer support and contact centers, and this is kind of this, I don't know, this dark orange here, they led the pack with pure outcome-based pricing, which makes sense because if that, it's probably it's easier to find a ticket resolved than other types of agentic work units. So contact support and customer centers, let me let one more person in, led the way with outcome-based pricing. And you can see the rest are a bit of a mix. Now, one thing that stands out, right, developer tools, a bit of a hybrid, no surprise, usage-based. I use Replit, get those usage charges all the time. And then what else? Healthcare, still, the stark gray on seat-based, legal, seat-based. But again, 7 of 14, half of all pure account vendors sell customer support software. And in that vertical, that's more than double the market rate. So that's the one that led the pack there. Some other stats here. So, and I'll have this as a download too in that research report. So you can kind of see by vertical, and depending on where you stand with your software in these verticals, just to get an idea, but it's still, right, we're still, pricing is shifting pretty fast here. So outcome pricing examined. So what does it look like when it's done right? And I have a blog post on this about creating a good outcome-based pricing plan. But a couple of things to keep in mind if you are shifting that way or thinking about that or have an outcome-based pricing plan, Allaware's AI-driven phone system, and they publish their actual pricing formula. It's very transparent. So you can see actually, what you're getting into. And every outcome has a timestamp, a transcript, a 30-day dispute window, which is a big deal. And Lorikeet, AI customer support, hands the buyer a veto. So if you're unhappy with how a ticket was resolved, you don't pay for it, right? So we've got transparent pricing, we've got veto power, and then finance ops, so AI agentic collections, charging 1.5% of collections recovered. And if they don't pay, you're not going to get charged for that. And then Intercom or FinNow, launched, they have some good pricing pages out there, 99% per resolution, all their stuff. Now you have to read a lot of the fine print there. Uh, but couple examples of just good pricing pages that are very transparent, one on the formulas, two on the veto power, and really three on that dispute window. Or for customer support software, what if that customer comes back 3 days later and asks that same question because they weren't happy on that first ticket? Will you get charged again for that? Or is that a freebie because they're now coming back because they didn't get their initial ticket resolved? So a lot of considerations with outcome-based pricing. Now you have a few AI native leaders arguing against outcomes, and this could be in their blog posts, mainly in blog posts, where A to CX, the model punishes success. So they say there's an incentive flaw, right? What if the outcomes keep growing and growing, and you're going to pay beyond what you would for normal enterprise software? And that's a lot of conversations I have with CFOs. Is if they're targeting mid-market enterprise companies, a lot of CFOs are like, hey, just give me a subscription. I just need this to be predictable, make it fair for you, fair for us. But usage or outcomes then turn into these big enterprise subscription agreements. Yeah, Barbara, that is a lot of customer support required. Decagon steers buyers to per conversations. So kind of the definition flaw. They offer outcome-based pricing, but say the vast majority of customers choose per conversation to avoid unpredictable invoices and renegotiation. So this is a case where they're offering both, right? You can do our outcome-based pricing if you like that, or just go with that rate times volume. And then Bland AI calls it a worse deal at volume. The arithmetic flaw or the math flaw here argues outcome-based pricing runs $8 to $25 per successful interaction, often higher than its own 11 to 14 cent per minute rate. So a couple where it's like, hey, you're probably better off, just using a rate volume or usage-based pricing for the value that you're getting. Now, billing, right? This is also a big deal. How are you getting billing? And, for the CFOs, controllers out there, all right, if we're offering outcome-based or agentic work units and priced that way, do we have all that billing infrastructure in place where the sales team says, hey, you're going to get, billed, per meeting booked, but then we get this weird, volume-based bill that has no relation to how they said the outcome-based was going to be set up. So this is where now the CFOs, controllers have to figure out all that billing infrastructure and all that data you need to put on the invoice. Because just think of how messy that can get if you don't have that transparency on how they're getting billed, especially if that bill went up that following month, right? We don't like that variability. So a lot of billing infrastructure going into place for outcome-based pricing. Let me check the time here, guys. Yeah, doing pretty good. All right, 5 questions before you sign outcome-based pricing. Well, what counts as a billable outcome? And again, I'm going to have some great cheat sheets and research reports at the end here. I'll show you how you can get those. But we have to be very clear on that outcome definition. And then who decides the outcome? And is there a conflict? If the vendor decides what's that, the outcome occurred, right? Or do we have some veto power there? Let me check the comments here. Yeah, you have to build that support cost into your pricing structure. Yep. And then three, what happens when it's wrong? How fast is that remedy? And then four, is there a reopen window that prevents double billing? So you see that a lot with especially support resolution. There's a 72-hour window where if they come back in again, right, you're not going to get billed twice. And then what is that pilot to production path and minimum volume? So you see a lot of these where it's you have this pilot set up, you're not getting charged. They want to make sure it's working, it's set up for you, and then before, they start billing you. So some have these pilot paths, just to prove things out, test, how those outcomes are being achieved, then start the billing. So the protections that separate real from marketed, right? Marketing outcome-based pricing versus actual outcome-based pricing. Failed outcomes get billed at zero, right? What are the escalations? How do we handle that? A dispute window with a credit back. That's another one. So, and then buyer veto on that determination, right? What if you have a dispute? And then that reopen ticket. So a couple things that show that they're protecting the customer here, versus just wanting to, really charge a rate times volume. Yeah, and Manish, yep, I'll be sharing these slides. So yeah, a lot of data and information packed in these, and I'll have actually a research report to share here too. So a lot of CFOs on this call, a lot of founders, also a lot of go-to-market and product folks. So if you're building AI pricing or outcome-based pricing, right? I won't read all this, and I also have a blog post at the SaaSCFO.com on this. But what's that unit of value? Do we have a floor? What about the risk? The outcome definition, a lot of things that must be considered if we're going to outcome-based pricing. But we saw from the slide, really hybrid is still leading the pack with platform plus usage, because not every software is meant for agentic or meant for outcome, at least in my opinion. Yeah, and Paul asks, I wonder how troublesome these pricing structures would be during audit cycle. Yeah, yeah, that's why like when you go to these outcome-based pricing plan pages, there's the pricing page, and then you've clicked the link to sometimes their support section it's like pages and pages of definitions, on how their outcome-based pricing works. So a lot of considerations, and I'll actually have a cheat sheet here, on so you can download this. So where is the market going? Right now, according to Iconic, 21% median AR growth for hybrid pricing models, the highest in any category. So no pure outcome, no, not pure seats, so we've kind of got a mix. And the market has not converged. Mentioned that in the beginning, we kind of in an experimental phase with 37% planning to reprice within a year, according to Iconic. And right now, I underline this, the safe structural bet is a well-designed hybrid. So we see that's leading the pack right now is that platform plus usage. Manish says, if I can feel a company can get away with usage-based pricing, it will. Yeah. How do customers take repricing? Yeah, Barbara. Yeah. Yeah, repricing, I don't know. That's gonna be a tough one, right? Unless the pricing plan was just not well thought out and it's just a disaster. Yeah, that's gonna be a hard conversation going back to the customer if you're trying to do it intra-contract. Now, I assume a lot of these are waiting to that renewal cycle, right, to change that pricing plan. So three lenses, one framework, right? If you're a CFO, right, we can't take outcome based at face value, right? We've got to read all the terms and definitions. If you're building pricing, right, treat this as a spectrum, right? We have 6 choices here that have come up through these 107 pricing pages, to think about how we want to price. Yeah, and Jim says there are product requirement considerations, telemetry that allows you to meter. Yeah, exactly. Right. You have to have that all built in your app. So you have all that data to send over to finance, to bill correctly. And then if you sell against outcomes, your anti-mission is now outcomes are bad, right? But we have to have that as well defined. We've got to have those periods of measurement, veto power, etc. So the customer's not pushing back on the invoice when they get it. So, couple call to actions here. Again, it covered is usage-based very similar to outcome-based? Well, Rushi, I would say usage-based, I think of that as rate times volume. Something happens, we charge a rate, you get your usage charge. Outcome is kind of rate volume times volume, but the volume piece, like when that kicks in, something has to happen, right? That defined thing must happen, right? So that's why we've seen this slow moved outcome because really it was just rate times volume instead of something being achieved. So, couple call to actions here, guys, so you can get these frameworks, the assets, etc. Covered a lot of information today. Um, yeah, and Patrick, how are companies providing guidance forecast for car? Meaning, are AI comps building in a contribution um, to AR from future successful outcomes? Yeah, I think, yeah, interesting, right? Car, contracted annual recurring revenue, which gets a little bit ambiguous with usage based, and outcome based. So I think we've got to see trends. And yeah, I think, yeah, Patrick, that's a whole another conversation, yeah, on AR definitions on a car. But yeah, that's a great question. So covered a lot of information today, guys. Appreciate the time, but not over yet here. Again, for the tech CFOs out there, I'll put up that slide again. But thanks for attending. One thing you'll get in email and a way to access this, you'll get the full deck from today. You'll get a vendor pricing scorecard if you are uh, evaluating outcome-based pricing, a pricing framework checklist. Let's see, Barbara, no matter how the pricing is, the SaaS will have to demonstrate success rates. Yeah, exactly. A pricing framework checklist and a 14-page research report on the full findings. And you'll have 72 hours to download that, and the email will go out so you can grab all these resources as a thanks for attending live today. All right, next, for the tech CFOs, SaaS CFOs out there. I've got a private community. We've got 600 plus in there in a Slack community, peers helping peers. So again, here's the slide. Scan the QR code or go to bit.ly/tech CFO community if you'd like to join us. And again, this is peers helping peers. We have AI meetups, different things. So a great place to get help from your peers on tech, on audit, on vendors, on whatever it might be. A lot of good stuff going on in there. So make sure you scan this QR code and go to bit.ly/tech CFO community. And then also, my next webinar is coming up, I believe, next week. So let me actually just escape a little bit here. Let me grab some links here. I'm going to throw these in the chat. My next webinar is coming up. With Cloud Capital, we're going to talk about cloud infrastructure costs. So that will be a big one for CFOs and controllers. So that link is in the chat. So catch us next Thursday already, talking about cloud infrastructure spend and how you can manage that, right? That's growing on the SaaS P&L. And then finally, a couple more things here. Just mention this quickly. I've got a SaaS metric sprint for all those CFOs, founders out there. So if you would like to improve your metrics data foundation, make it AI ready, this live cohort begins October 6th. I've had 1,000 plus people in my previous live cohorts. So if you want some hands-on guidance on getting your data metrics ready, especially AI ready, I'm having AI write my board reports right now, and it's pretty fascinating. But that's coming up October 6th. And then also one last thing, if you can, let me see, where is oh yeah. If you did find some value in today's webinar, I'm going to put this in the chat too again. Just go to this LinkedIn post and just hit like. I would appreciate that. Just show if there was some value in today's content and slides. I would love that just to share the word out there. And then let's see. Final slide here, and I know I don't have it maximized, but right, price for the value, not for the login, right? That's why, that seat-based argument, we see that dying a bit, if there's different work going into that, right? A seat equaled someone doing something. Now that means different things in the agentic AI world. So what's going to happen next is, let's see, let me go back here. Yes. So I'll have an email going out in a couple hours. We'll have the replay. We'll have the full deck, the vendor pricing scorecard, the pricing framework checklist, the research report, all that great stuff. So you can dig into this, share it with your team, and then stay tuned for future webinars and then join me for next week's webinar. But I'll hang out here. Yeah, if there are any, yeah, Valerie, fantastic, insightful. Great session. Yeah, no, guys, always cover a lot of information here, but any questions, comments, throw it in the chat. And if you want to reach out to me, I'm at ben at the SaaSCFO.com, which I think is in the last slide. Uh, so yeah, always fun going through the database stuff here to see what's actually happening. And it kind of lines up with, oh, the QR code, Barbara, for the tech community. Guys, yeah, let me go back here. So scan this QR code. There are a lot of CFOs signing up today. So if you'd like to join us, just apply there. It's a great community, peers helping peers. Um, yeah. Oh, yeah. Hey, John. Yep. Yeah, the replay will go out, plus the slides, plus here, let me go back here. All this good stuff. Yeah, so again, guys, 34 minutes covered a ton. Any connections to investors, well, just reach out to me. Hey, Stacy. And yeah, next week, talking cloud infrastructure, AI spend. So again, let me put that in the show notes or show notes. I'm thinking podcast here. Uh, yeah, let me put this in here. And again, appreciate Maxio for sponsoring this. So if you are struggling with outcome-based billing, usage billing, consumption billing, be sure to check those guys out too. So yeah, guys, any last questions, comments, or anything else that you guys would like to see? Just throw that in the chat. But let me go back here for those who are just kind of attending late here. I think, this was the out of this data set, the really interesting one. Hybrid leads the pack right now. Usage, consumption, outcome per seat, then per unit of work. Which again, per unit of work is a company defined thing that you're doing on behalf of your customer. All right, guys. Well, that's it for today. Cover a lot of stuff, but make sure you check your email to see how you can. I'll get all this stuff loaded to my No Fluff course series. That's where I load all this stuff. So again, if you're thinking about your pricing mechanics, where things should go, if people are pushing towards outcome-based pricing, well, yeah, we're not quite there yet. Yeah, yeah, Mutha. Yeah, definitely we'll keep this updated and do another one, maybe at yeah, next year or early next year. So all right, guys. Well, with that, we're 36 minutes in. Um, yeah. Yeah. If anything comes up, email me at ben at the SaaSCFO.com and then check your email for the assets. And we'll see you on hopefully next week's webinar. And let me put that again, guys. If you do want to talk cloud infrastructure spend, let me put that in the chat one more time. Join us next Thursday. All right, guys. With that, we're going to sign off here. And yeah, thanks for joining today. See you guys.